respond. So it's very important. I want to talk about in communication and relationships, then you have to learn how to set times up, right? I talked about being vulnerable. So if I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm going to have that true love relationship, then I have to understand that I need to literally set times, right? So I'm going to literally take times to set up and say, you know what, on Thursday at 4 o'clock, this is our time for communication and the things that may be upon your heart that you need to share, because you got to remember today people have so many schedules. Some couples work opposite shifts. Some couples have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids, 2 kids, whatever. The dogs, the family members, your in-laws, all of those things are going on. So you have to literally schedule time to be able to have an effective conversation without interruption, right? Because how many know that if you start a conversation and it's not planned, it's not scheduled, it's not put on the calendar, it's not, set aside to say this is our time, how many know it could be easily interrupted? And so I want to really recommend unto couples to really make sure that you take time to schedule in. For those of you that may be entrepreneurs, those of you that may work for yourself like I do, it's very important that you have to literally put it in the calendar to schedule time to say, okay, this is my date night. This is my time of communication. This is my time to schedule intimacy. All of these different things, you need to try to begin to schedule them. Why? Because your schedule is full. You're constantly going. You have things on your agenda. So you need to make sure that you're still being effective in communication with your spouse. And so put those times in there, put those spaces in there, and then don't allow them to be altered. I know a lot of times people will put it down, but then when something comes up, then you switch that. So it's very important that you understand with communication, and when you're communicating with your spouse and you're working with your love relationship, then you're going to have to be able to make an investment in it, and you're going to have to be able to have endurance with it, but you're also going to have to be able to schedule certain things. So you schedule it, you put it in place, you put it in operation, and you make sure that it's going to cause, it's going to be, effective, put it that way. So even let me tell you how important this is, because a lot of times we feel like it's just whenever I feel, let me just start talking about it. But it's so important that even if you have things on your heart that you want to communicate with your spouse, write those things down, jot it down. If you're not a writer, get a dictaphone on your phone and just make a note and say it in your phone. You know what, I need to talk to my spouse about this. I need to talk to my spouse about that. And then guess what happens? Then you go back and revisit that. So when you come together, you have specific things that you're able to speak to them about, and you have specific things that you want to communicate about that's going to cause you to be able to grow. So I think that it's very important and that you understand when it comes to communicating in relationships that this is something that cannot be avoided, right? So you're going to have to learn how to communicate effectively. You're going to have to learn how to be able to speak effectively to your spouse and setting up the proper settings. The worst thing that can happen is for a person to be, say you're out to dinner with a crowd of people, or you're around, family or friends, and then your spouse wants to talk about something that you may feel is personal, or feel that you don't want to expose or don't want to talk about in front of other people. And so that's the worst feeling. And so it's very important that you learn your spouse, learn about them, understand, study their ways, study their patterns, study, them, so that you can understand how to effectively communicate, and then to know when to communicate. Like I said, for some of you, you're going to have to literally schedule those times, or some people just wait until they go to bed, and it's another form of pillow talk. So they'll be in the bed and then start to discuss different things. But even if that's the way that you want to communicate, you need to make sure that that's a time that's going to be acceptable for your spouse, so that your spouse may be tired and worn out at the time that you're ready to share. But if you communicate that to your spouse and say, you know what, when we go to bed, I'd like to share something with you this evening or on this particular day, it helps your spouse to be aware of that and even more alert. because if you're tired and you've had a long day, how many know you may not want to be talking at a time? You may be exhausted and you're just ready to go to sleep. If you have, young children or whatever, when you hit the bedroom, sometimes you don't feel like you're wanting to communicate or talk about different issues. You may really just be that tired that you want to fall out. And so especially for women who have multiple things that are going on, multiple assignments that are happening throughout the day. You may be a wife, you're a mother, you're a worker at some type of business, or you're a CEO or entrepreneur. So you have so many different hats that you're playing. Then you may be a daughter-in-law, you may be a mother-in-law, you may be so many different avenues that you are having to work out, right? Then you may be the caretaker for your parent. So there's so many avenues that you have to deal with, and you have to make sure that you can put a balance to each and every one of those so that the fulfillment of what needs to happen can come to pass. So I pray that this is encouraging you on today, because love is a beautiful thing, but it has to be done in the proper portion and in the right mindset, and the right patterns have to be established and set up. Being married for over 32 years and understanding I had to go through the process of trial and error, I want to be able to help you on this show, even through, like I said, through my book. I want to be able to introduce these topics to you that will help you to really survive and be able to grow. More and more, we're seeing, the divorce rate is high. People are not staying together like they used to. Why? Because a lot of times people don't know how to implement things at the beginning. And so as soon as they have those hard and those rough seasons, they begin to immediately back down, or they begin to throw in the towel completely on the relationship. So I want to take a minute to recommend my book to you. If you see this book, I want you, amen, to order. It's called The Misconception of Love and Relationships. It's a beautiful book that's going to bless you, bless your life, bless your family, your husband, your wife, either one. It's not written for women only. It's written, amen, to be able to bless couples as a whole. Why? Because there's so many misconceptions in relationships, and I believe communication is one of them. Learning how to effectively communicate will always transition your life. Learning how to effectively communicate will always transition your life. Hear me. You will grow and grow and grow. The easier it is for you all to communicate and get on the same page and to transition how you're thinking or how you have thought. Sometimes people say, oh, that's for the birds. I'm just going to tell them when I feel like it. I'm going to say when I feel like it, but that may not work. And let me tell you something. Even if you're not an effective communicator verbally, then communicate through writing letters. Communicate through your social media not your social media, but your phone. Learn how to communicate. I love to write, so I'm a writer as well. So sometimes throughout the times, I would sit down and just write a 3 or 4 page letter to release my emotions and feelings and give that letter to that spouse. And I think that that's so important, because sometimes you may not have the words to articulate and sit down in front of that person, but you can still get the communication out by writing, being effective. And so if your spouse is a writer and they may not be a talker as much, don't shut them down to say, no, you have to say it. Sometimes it's good. Allow them to take that moment to write each and every thing that they may be feeling, and to give it to you and give you time to read over it. And then you're able to come back to that thing and begin to now read it, and then you all have a conversation about it. Sometimes that's easier for the person who may not be as communicative. All right. And so there are so many ways that we can communicate with our spouse. There's so many things that we can do with our spouse to learn each other and to become vulnerable in that state. And so vulnerability, like I said, is something that really takes you through a process of growth, right? Being willing to trust that person, being willing to release yourself to that person, being willing to say, you know what, I'm going to open my heart, open myself, give of myself to this particular person. When you're talking about a love relationship, it's a covenant, right? So when you're talking about a covenant, remember that a covenant is an agreement between two people. So anytime that the covenant is broken, it means that the agreement is no longer there. It means that somebody wants to opt out. Somebody wants to leave. Why? Because of these things have broken down. Communication is broken down. Trust has been broken down. Vulnerability is no longer there. You can't be vulnerable to that person, and communication is no longer there. So you have to understand these are ways and avenues that we can transition our life, transition ourselves to get in a position to be able to fulfill a healthy relationship. And so a lot of people really want wonderful relationships. We want beautiful relationships. We want to be connected. We want to have this wonderful, I think I saw on the Relationship Corner the other day on social media, someone said, we want to have this wonderful wedding, but we don't realize about what it takes to have the marriage. And so that's true. I think a lot of people have a fantasy or a fairy tale of what it takes to really maintain a love relationship, what it takes to really maintain and to get in the proper alignment and positioning to be able to endure for a process of time into covenant. So again, what I said, covenant is an agreement between two parties. So that means that you have to now come in alignment to say, because I made this particular vow, I'm agreeing to fulfill that vow, right? I'm agreeing to say that I'm going to walk through storms. I'm going to walk through life. I'm going to learn how to communicate. I'm going to learn how to trust you. I'm going to learn how to be vulnerable. I'm going to learn how to open my heart and give of myself. I'm going to learn to grow with you through the phases of life, right? Because how many know that you are not the same person that you are when you marry? So if you marry at 25, how many know 30 years later, you're not going to be the same person that you were? So that means that person, when they say that they come into covenant with you, in an agreement with you, it is about them advancing. It's about them growing. It's about their life changing. And you're willing to go through the changes of life with that person to grow and mature together for a better relationship. So